Let's start part 2 of the project now. And in part 2, we're going to look at the impacts of a potential fishing closure to ports that are in the region. All right, so part 1, remember we were looking at how much work different ports were spending at sea through our variable called fisherman days. All right, so let's make sure that the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary is added here and visible. We're going to be using our port impacts layer that you made in part 1 of the assignment, and we still have our coast geography visible, right? So that's just so we can see where the coastline is. All right, we've got our trip data, our NEC GC304. That's all of our main trip data, and we're going to be using that here in this part of the assignment. So what your task is here in part 2 is to figure out which port depends the most on fishing within this marine sanctuary as a percentage of their total work time. All right, so we can use our GIS data to answer a few questions. One of those could be which port catches the most fish here. We're going to be interested in which port depends the most on it in terms of how much work they actually do. So we're going to use that variable called fisherman days. So you're going to end up calculating the total fisherman days each port spends within the Stellwagen Bank Marine Sanctuary. And you're going to have to divide that by their total fisherman days they spend anywhere out here in the ocean. And we're going to find out which port is the biggest, which port spends the biggest percentage of their working time inside the National Marine Sanctuary. So to do that, first step is to select by location all of the trips that are within Stellwagen. All right, so to do that, open up your toolbox. You can type in select up here in the search bar, and what we're going to look for is select by location. So open up the tool. We want to select features from our trip data, which is NEC GC304, and we want to select features where they are intersected by Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. Once we do that, then click Run, and you can zoom in and see all of our features that are now selected. So the next step is to summarize our attributes just like you did in part 1 where we did statistics by categories. We're going to use the same tool, statistics by categories, but now we're going to make sure that we're only summarizing these selected features. So once you have statistics by categories tool open again, our input vector layer is our main trip data layer, NEC GC304, but this time we need to check the selected features only. Make sure you check that because that makes sure that it's only going to calculate our summaries for the selected points. Our field to calculate statistics is going to be our fish days. That's the attribute that you created way back at the beginning of part 1 where we just calculated that variable using field calculator. Here where it's got fields with categories, we need to select our ports, which is still under P port. Click OK, and then it's going to hide our tool window. We just need to bring that window back to the front. Click here to save to file, and we've got Stellwagen underscore summary is what you can call this. So again, I recommend just clicking the 3 points here and clicking save to file, and then choosing your folder and type it in the file name. So once you click run and click close, then we have our table is now in our layers window. And as you should know by now, this is just a table. It is not actually a GIS layer yet. It's just a data table. And we can open up the attribute table and we can see our figures for each port. And just like we've seen on part 1, we have a lot of statistics calculated. And the one we're interested in is going to be sum. Now again, this is still we need to do a couple more things here, but we can see that each port, their sum of their fisherman days, because that's the statistic that we calculated. So we need to create a new field so that we just know that this is the sum for fisherman days within Stellwagen. So open up field calculator, create a new field. We're just going to call this Stell underscore fish underscore days. And it's going to equal sum. click OK. And then we have over on the end, on the right side of our attribute table, we have Stell fish days. This is the total number of fisherman days spent in Stellwagen National Marine Sanctuary by each port. So you can close this table, and now we need to join it. We need to join this table to our port impacts layer that you made in part 1. And if you go to port impacts, open up attribute table, you can remember that this is where we had already calculated joined 2 previous tables there related to the total quantity of fish and our total fisherman days. Well, now we're going to add the values from our Stellwagen summary table also. So go back to the toolbox. You're going to join by attributes by field value. We're going to make sure port impacts is our input layer and our Stellwagen summary is input layer 2. We're going to be joining according to port name and P port. And this time, if you just want to have a little bit of a cleaner output, we can go down here to where it says layer 2 fields to copy. We can click these 3 points here, and let's just select Stell fish days. And that's only going to bring in the Stellwagen fisherman days variable and none of the other stuff. You could have done this on part 1, but now that you know how to do join, we'll take a little bit more of an advanced step now. Click OK. The tool is now hidden, just like it always happens. So we've got to bring this back to the front. Go down here to where it says joined layer. Click Save to File. Type in port impacts Stellwagen. And now you can click Run and then click Close. And we've now joined our data to our ports layer, and we have a new ports impact layer. So let's just take a minute to clean up our window here. We can uncheck our total trip data file. We can uncheck our port impacts. We can actually remove that one. And let's take a look at our port impacts Stellwagen layer. Open the attribute table, and you're going to be looking for the fields that matter for you right now, which is our total fisherman days and the fisherman days just spent in Stellwagen. So we've got our total fisherman days here. We've got total quantity of fish. At this time, we're not going to be working with that variable though. We're going to be looking here at Stell fish days. All right, so we've got our Stell fish days variable here. We've got to figure out the percentage of fisherman days spent in Stellwagen. So to do that, we're going to make a new variable. So open up field calculator again, and we're going to call this %Stell, and we're going to change our output field type to a decimal number this time. All right, so to calculate this is a simple way to calculate a percentage, and where we take the number of fisherman days in Stellwagen, you divide that by the total fisherman days altogether for each port, and then you multiply that answer by 100, and then that gives you the percentage. So I'm going to put in the parentheses and Stell fish days divided by total fish days, but the end of the parentheses times, and then just type in 100. And that's going to give you a number in that field called %Stell. And so the number here you'll just see in my window is the first one at the top is 1.22. That means whatever that this port for this record here spends about 1% of their working time in Stellwagen National Marine Sanctuary. So that they don't depend too much on this port in terms of how much work their crew are doing. Well, next we need to symbolize that data. So let's open up our properties and go to Symbology, and instead of single symbol, we're going to go to graduated, and our value is going to be our percentage in Stellwagen. For this, just like in part 1, we're going to use natural breaks. We're going to make sure our data is classified correctly just by clicking classify. We're going to click load values here under the histogram just to make sure everything is nice and loaded, and we're going to make sure that our method is size. And again, if you want to configure your color scheme in a way that you like, you can do that. Let's click a red this time. I'm going to click OK. And then we have an entirely new way to visualize our data. And again, just like we did on part 1, some of those ports are now disappeared. It might be good to see some of them maybe a little bit better. So you can always go back in and change our point sizes. And so doing that shows the ports, and the points here are showing you the percentage of fisherman days spent in Stellwagen National Marine Sanctuary. Some of them are close to that marine sanctuary, and some of them are not so close. And so this is a really good way to use GIS to look at spatial patterns and to examine the ways that people are interacting in the environment in ways that we might not be expecting them to. And it's a really useful tool to think critically about human interactions with the environment.